You're on there.
Hey, this is Mike Belcito of Product Collective, and we are here for another live product lunch session, which I'm super excited about. In fact, the first product lunch of 2017. I am joined here by Dan Olsen. Dan, how's it going?
It's going great, thanks.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us. I'm excited to have Dan. Dan is going to be a speaker and actually a workshop presenter at Industry later in the year, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to share a little bit more about Dan, and we'll be getting into a lot of questions with Dan. So if you have questions of your own and you want to submit them right there in the chat, you're welcome to do that. My partner, Paul, he'll be sending me questions just as we go throughout. So I might pick on your questions. So definitely send those questions through. But first, a little bit about Dan. Dan has an awesome background, super relevant for what we're going to talk about today, which is the elusive product market fit. But Dan is an entrepreneur, consultant, and he's a link product expert. Currently, Dan has his own company, Olsen Solutions, where he works with CEOs and product leaders to help build great products and also build up great product teams. Some of his clients in the past, definitely companies that you've heard of, Facebook, Box, Microsoft. So you could tell just from that mix, it's companies at the startup level, companies at the enterprise level, smaller companies, huge companies. Prior to starting Olsen Solutions, Dan had worked at Intuit, where he led the product team to record sales and profit. He's also been at a number of other places, including Friendster. Now, Dan is the author of the Lean Product Playbook, which I think many of us, have read in the past, and we'd count it as one of the best product books out there. So with that, I wanted to give you that formal introduction. Again, thanks for being here, Dan.
Great, it's my pleasure. It's really nice to talk to you. I'm really excited to be speaking at the Industry in September. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, we're really pumped to have you. But I guess before we even get into some of what you dive into with the Lean Product Playbook and some of the processes that you really sort of codified for the book. How did you get into product management in the first place? Maybe you could just give us the quick background of what brought you there.
Yeah, I think it's funny to hear people's journeys into product management, because just there's not one path, and it's more of a career nowadays, but it wasn't before. So for me, I've been comfortable with computers since I was 10. I've been coding since I was 10. My dad got me a computer, so I was comfortable with that. I studied electrical engineering in college. And then I actually worked on nuclear submarine design after college, which in hindsight was just really technical product management. It sounds kind of funny now that I know what product management is. But as I was working on that, I realized I wanted to get more on the business side of things, like leverage my technical background. I got a master's in industrial engineering at Virginia Tech, and then decided to apply to business schools. And then when I got admitted to Stanford, I moved out to Silicon Valley a little over 20 years ago. And that's where I realized, there's this thing called product management. That's exactly what I want to do with my career. And then I asked everybody, hey, where's the best place to learn product management, to do product management? And everybody at the time said Intuit was the best place to go. So, and it certainly was. Back then, not every place had product manager job titles. There were debates like, should PM report into marketing or engineering, that kind of stuff. And it was just a great place to learn all about product management, product development, marketing, customer research. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I know we've talked about this before. I think everybody's story, it seems to be this like winding road into product management. So it's really cool to hear how you ended up there. Now, you've done a ton of things, but you also wrote this book, The Lean Product Playbook. And, this is a book that's really all about how people can build products that people love. There's been a lot of people that have said a lot of good things about this book. Aaron Levy, Laura Klein, awesome product management expert. How did you end up writing this book in the first place?
Yeah, well, I had built a solid foundation in product management, working into it, and then I worked at 2 startups after that. And then I started consulting. And one of the cool, unexpected side benefits of consulting was that I saw a lot of different products and a lot of different teams in rapid succession. And so that really accelerated my learning. And basically being like an interim VP of product for companies like Box and Usendit. And I started to see common themes and saw common issues that teams were struggling with and common patterns, basically. And around that time, shortly thereafter, I also got into speaking and giving talks. And I would give talks to product managers and share my advice and best practices. And I would get all these questions about, what about this? And what do you do when this happens? And so over time, I iterated, expanded my talks. And so basically between consulting and giving talks to product teams, I started to really, it all started to kind of come together, and I could see there's kind of like this common formula, for what it takes to have a successful product. Obviously each product is different, but it's kind of like this meta blueprint, of the things that have to exist to have a successful product. And so I started giving talks, about that. And then someone at Wiley basically saw one of the talks I gave at Google and said, hey, would you like to write a book about it? And I'd always wanted to write a book about it. And so then I used the time writing the book to really refine my thinking, bring it all together, polish it up, and go really deep. And that's basically how I ended up writing the book. And it was good. It's long. It took a lot of time and hard work, but I'm proud of it, and I hope it's a helpful resource for people.
Well, you definitely should be proud of it. I mean, I was checking out the Amazon profile of the book. There's a ton of amazing reviews. It's one of the top product management books that are out there. Why do you think it's resonated so much with people?
I think one thing is my approach. I wrote it as a how-to guide. That's why it's called the Playbook. I'm a very pragmatic guy. I think a lot of product managers are pragmatic people, and my book is too. Sometimes you read a book or hear a talk which is entertaining or interesting, and during the talk it's great and you kind of nod and it feels good. Then you go back to your office and you realize, I don't know how to apply what I just learned, right? The speaker didn't connect the dots between their examples and how I can apply it. And so for me, it's very, first and foremost, an applied book, And I think that's, for example, why like canvases are so popular. It's easy to just jump in and start using one, right? They're very applied. And actually, one of my favorite reviews of the book was a tweet that somebody wrote, and they said basically, in the Lean Startup, Eric Ries explains what it is and why it's important. In Dan's book, he explains how to do it. And so that's what I found is a lot of times, even when the speaker gives you advice, you go back to your office and you have questions about how to do it, So that's first. And then, the other thing is, I had several product experts read the manuscript and give me feedback. And one of them, who's very smart, said, wow, what you're trying to do in this book is actually prescribe like this end-to-end process that anybody can follow for any product to achieve product market fit. I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. It's not just talking about one topic, like how to do UX design or how to do user testing. So that's why it's so long. I'm attempting to kind of bite off the whole elephant and say, here's a process you can do end-to-end, and there are certainly books that go deeper in certain areas. Mine goes deep enough, I think, to get everything done. But that was the idea. And so as a result, it also is very comprehensive. I was like, if I'm going to write a book, I want it to basically contain pretty much everything you need to know to build a successful product. So above and beyond the lean product process, which I know we're going to talk about, which is the core of the book, there's also, early in my career, I realized UX design is critical to successful products. So there's a whole chapter just on UX design, right? There are whole books on UX design, but this is like the core kind of UX design concepts that I think PM should be aware of. There's also a whole chapter on agile development. Obviously, again, there are books on that, but this is my kind of one chapter version of how to do agile. And there's two chapters on how to use analytics to optimize your products, basically. So it's and there's case studies and things like that. So it's comprehensive, and it also, as a result, I think a lot of product management is frameworks, and that's basically visual diagrams. And so it has over 50 figures and tables in it, again, which contribute to help illustrate the concept. So, and I think the last thing is, product management is kind of hard to learn. You can't get a degree in product management, I just got off the phone with the business school professor, and we were just joking about that because there's, you can't get a degree in it. I used to joke with my business school class friends, hey, remember that product management class we took? No, because there wasn't one, right? And so nowadays you're starting to see people do more and more. There's other resources, but you still can't get a degree. And there aren't a lot of great in-depth resources. There are a lot of articles and posts, right?
Right.
1 page, 2 page, 3 pages, people sharing their learnings, and those are great. But it's hard to find a good in-depth book that kind of puts it all together for you. There are a few out there, but so anyway, I think that's part of why it's popular.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Now I know, with the book that the end game, for the reader is helping them find product market fit for, whatever product it is that they're building.
That's right.
And that's something that, it's tough to achieve, but I also think it's something that it seems like sometimes it's misunderstood. I guess, how would you define product market fit in the first place? Do you find that some people have, sort of different thoughts of what it is? And what's your opinion on what product market fit truly is?
So it all started in 2007. Mark Andreessen, of Netscape, Andreessen Horowitz fame, coined that term in a blog post called, they titled The Only Thing That Matters. And then Eric Ries made it popular as part of the lean startup movement, which by the way was great for product management. In my opinion, there's like a huge overlap between product management and lean startup, especially product market fit, right? And so in a lot of ways, lean startup advanced it, by helping create a common set of vocabulary and techniques and concepts. But like anytime there's a new buzzword, you see a range of interpretations and definitions, you know. And MVP is like the poster child for this. Like you go online and you see, I remember seeing a blog post that said, the title was, "A landing page is not an MVP." And somebody completely disagreed and wrote a counter post, "A landing page is an MVP." You know, so these like religious wars, you know, trolling online about MVP. Product market fit is a little different. There is a range of interpretation, but people just kind of talk about it matter-of-factly. Like, oh, Box succeeded because they had product market fit. So-and-so startup failed because they did not have product market fit. So it's really hard to find a good definition. And basically, if I knew that being a rigorous guy, that if I was going to prescribe a process, I needed a framework. And so I created a framework. I'll show you in a sec. But the other thing I see it's not is some people like to define it super broadly. Like it means your business is making money. You know, it's like, well, we have a term for that. It's called profitable. You know, it's like we already have a term for making money. It's called profitable. So to just say product market fit means like all this, like rainbows and unicorns and pots of gold, everything's going crazy. That's, I think, an overstatement of it. So, you know, the reality is to have a successful business, you need product market fit, and you need the ability to like find and cost effectively acquire customers. Let's call it effective distribution strategy, and favorable economics, you know, an effective business model. And ideally, it's in a large, high-growth market. But to call all that product market fit is just too much, right? So for me, product market fit is just a component. And I'm not trying to minimize the other ones. You know, you need to do all those things to have a successful business. And the question is, where do you want to start? And what's the biggest risk that you want to mitigate? And I think for the vast majority of companies, the product risk is the big risk. Is can we build a product that creates real customer value? And so product market fit really means validating that customers agree that you've created real value, which at its essence means that you're serving some needs that they had that were underserved by whatever else was out there, and that your product is better than the other alternatives that are out there.
That's awesome. I appreciate that as a definition. And you alluded to the process.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's the lean product process, I think is how you lay it out in the book. Yep. Before I dive into that, just as like a quick aside to everybody that's watching, it looked like there might be some people that had audio visual issues, but then there's some people that said they could see and hear everything fine. I just want to let everybody know we're recording this. So if you're just joining now, if you had issues in the beginning, you're back in on a different browser, you will be able to see the whole thing. So know that that is the case. And also, I know I'm asking questions here, feel free to ask questions right in the chat. I mentioned that before, but Paul, my partner, who's on the other end and sort of manning the controls, he's gonna be sending me those questions. So I'll definitely get to audience questions. So, you know, I'll get back to what we were talking about, Dan, which is the lean product process. And, you know, I believe you have even something like visually that we might be able to sort of see and get a feel for. Maybe we could dive into that a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah. I think, again, picture's worth 1,000 words. And let me share real quick on my screen. And all right, here we go. Let me switch over to PowerPoint. Let me know when it comes up for you.
Yeah, I think I can see that now.
Okay, great. So basically, you know, to go deeper into what in product market fit, I basically created a framework called the product market fit pyramid. I just want to walk through it real quick because it's the foundation for the lean product process. And basically, a market, it's a hierarchical model, has 5 layers. The bottom 2 layers are the market. You know, market is a set of customers that have a set of needs, basically. That's the definition of a market if you look in any economics or marketing book, right? It's not really rocket science. And so for me, the model ends up being like a way to capture the key assumptions or hypotheses in what you're doing. And so who is our target customer and what are their underserved needs? You know, and the book talks a lot about how to identify underserved needs versus needs that are adequately served. But that's a market. And that's the bottom 2 layers of the product market fit pyramid. Your product, the way I like to represent your product is these 3 layers. Your value proposition, which is, okay, which of those needs are we actually going to try to address with our product, and how are we going to do so in a way that's better or different than what's already out there? The feature set, which is what's the functionality that's going to actually convey those benefits to the users, and this is where the concept of MVP comes in. And then finally, the UX design, which is what brings the functionality to life for the user. So that's the product market fit. So you make all these decisions up top in your product, you know, either in design or in coding or building it. And then the market's out there with whoever those people are and their needs. And then product market fit is just how well are all the assumptions and decisions you're making for the top two layers, how well do they fit and resonate with the bottom two layers? So that's a product market fit pyramid. Now, once I had this basically as a template to capture your key assumptions that are important to achieve product market fit, I realized we can turn this into a process basically. And so all it does is it walks you through each of those steps. And I have a chapter dedicated to each of those steps that goes really in depth on how to think about it. So for target persona, for example, for target customers, for example, use personas to capture our assumptions about that. Underserved needs, I don't have time to go into it, but basically I have an importance versus satisfaction framework that you can use to really identify the biggest opportunities to create customer value. And then step 3 is your value proposition. And this is where actually I use a model called the Kano model to differentiate between must-haves and performance benefits and features and delighters. But it's really where you get the essence of product strategy is at this step. Really, how are you going to be better or different than what else is out there? And I work with a lot of product teams, and I would say probably less than 10% ever get explicit about what their product strategy is and how they're really better or different. Feature set, again, this is where MVP comes in. It's really tough to figure out what should be in the MVP or not. I'll have another slide later on to share a little bit about that. And then finally, UX design. And as I said, it's so important. I introduced a chapter, right? So at this point, we want to basically, I'm a big proponent of testing your assumptions and hypotheses in the cheapest way possible. And so rather than going and coding and building something, at this point, we have a UX prototype, the tip of the pyramid, that represents all the assumptions and hypotheses that we've made below this. Well, now we can close the loop, which is step 6, and take our UX prototype and go and test it with customers, actually go out and close the loop and assess where we're at with product market fit. So that's the 6 steps of the lean product process. It's an iterative process. And real quick, some of you may be familiar with the build, measure, learn loop from Lean Startup. I think it's a great initial framework to get people thinking about iterating. But there are a couple things I see that get people tripped up. One is I don't think it should start with building. Building and spending precious engineering resources is one of the most expensive things you can do. I think you can learn faster without building. And secondly, measure sounds quantitative to me. It's like, hey, we're measuring something that's numerical. And the reality is, especially in the early days of a new product, qualitative is incredibly valuable and important. So I have a modified version of that iteration loop, which I call hypothesize, design, test, learn. So it all starts with forming hypotheses, coming up, designing a test to test your hypotheses, testing it, learning, and revising your hypotheses. So that's the iterative, that's the lean product process and the iterative approach that we take throughout.
That's great. And it's very helpful to have you walk us through it like that. I had mentioned before, by the way, some questions that are coming in, we'll address them at the end, but there's one question that popped up that it's totally relevant to what you were just talking about. Okay. And the question was, what is product strategy? And I can actually relate to that question because I was a director of product strategy. And I remember when I was offered that role, I think I shared this with you, the first thing I did was Google, what does a director of product strategy do? So just what is it? What factors do you need to consider what product strategy really is? Yeah.
I'm really glad that somebody asked that question, and I think it's one of my pet topics, and I think that it's something I want to go deeper into, maybe even write a book on, just product strategy one day. But, at the end of the day, let me tell you what it's not, an example of what it's not. You may have worked in a company where the sales team is like every sales team wants to sell product, and they go out and they basically go and talk to prospective customers, and prospective customer says, hey, is your product going to do A? Oh, yeah, it's going to do A. It's going to do A. Okay, cool. I'll sign the contract. And they go back and say, hey, guys, we got to have it do A. Hey, is your product going to next one? Hey, is it going to do B? Oh, yeah, it's going to. They always say yes to every customer request, right? That's not being strategic, right? So my favorite definition of strategy is it means saying no. And there's actually a really good book I love. It's about game theory and thinking. It's called Thinking Strategically. And basically, it emphasizes the point: if you can easily reverse a decision or action, then it wasn't strategic. Like if you can just change your mind the next day, then it wasn't strategic. Strategic means kind of an irreversible kind of burn the boats. Once we decide to do this, we can't change back, right? So it means saying no. And again, to illustrate it, I quote. There's several Steve Jobs quotes in the book. And there's a famous one where he said, for every yes, and he's talking about the context of when we say yes to a certain product feature or design, we've had 1,000 no's before that. Like we've said 1,000 no's to 1,000 other things before. So that's what strategy is. Hold on. So let me pull it up. I'll show this one slide that kind of brings it all together. It's tough without the Kano model, but I'll show it real quick. Let me share my screen real quick. Sorry, guys. Share screen. Okay, cool. Share. So this is the, just to get more, again, tactical about it, this is the framework that I recommend doing. Again, when you're talking about your product strategy, your value prop, can you guys see? You see
yeah.
it, Mike? Okay, cool.
Yep.
It's what benefits, out of all the benefits that in our discovery process we identified, which ones are we actually going to tackle with our product and specifically our MVP, and then how are we going to be better than the competitors? And so what I recommend doing is basically listing your key competitors, one in each column, and you or your product. And then I don't have time to go into the Kano model, but basically, you know, what are the must-have benefits for your product category? What are the performance benefits? What are the delighter benefits? And then you basically go through and you score your competitors, right? You know, high, medium, low, or yes, or whatever. If you can get quantitative with certain performance benefits, that's great too. And then that's the backdrop with which you say, okay, we're not going to fight these guys on every front. One, we don't have the resources to, but even if we did, it would be kind of dumb because we wouldn't be focused and clear on what our product value proposition and differentiation are. So with this backdrop, we go through and we say, of course, we're going to have the must-have benefit. Competitor A is the best at performance benefit 1. We're going to do a little bit there, but we're not going to try to beat them there. You know, performance benefit 2, competitor B is the best at that one, but we're just going to kind of not even worry about that one too much, and it's okay. We're going to focus instead on being the best at performance benefit 3, right? Because maybe we've identified some underserved market segment, or we have some technology ideas for how we're going to be better. And then competitor A has a delighter, and we have an idea for our delighter. At the end of the day, your product strategy is what are the performance benefits that you're going to outperform the competition on, and what are your unique delighters, right? Nobody competes on must-haves, basically. So this is a framework that you can use to get clear. And in the book, actually, to get strategic beyond this, I actually have this where you do it now and you do it in the future. And you kind of plot the trajectory of where these guys go and where do you think they're going and where are you planning to go, so that you're actually taking into a longer term view as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for that.
Sure.
And by the way, if you do write that product strategy book, put me on the early reader list. I would love to
go back in time and give it to the younger Mike.
Now, you know, you've used some terms that we're all familiar with, but, you know, terms like lean, minimum viable product. Sometimes people put those terms in the camp of these are things for startups. Is that necessarily the case, or could even a larger enterprise organization, you know, find relevance with, you know, building minimum viable products, going through a lean process? What are your thoughts on that?
It definitely is. It's so funny because I'll give a talk, and then someone will come up to me and they'll be like, yeah, Dan, but this is for B2C. We can't do this in B2B. I'm like, wait a minute, you guys don't have customers in B2B? They don't have needs? You don't need to have a product strategy? You know, so little things come up that make people just feel like it's not, you know, sometimes they take the case studies to, like, a lot of times they use Airbnb as a case study and they take it to literally like, oh, that's Airbnb, I can't do it. They can't have trouble extracting out. But that process is meant to apply to both. And by the way, I should say also, it applies for new products. So obviously if you're doing like Blue Sky, new V1 product, it's clear how it applies. It also, though, applies for any new feature as well. If you're adding a feature to an existing product, that's a new feature. It's just a mini product, if you will, and you need to get clear on what the benefits are. Also, if you're improving a product, or if you've never applied these techniques, you can retroactively apply them, figure out, okay, what do customers value? You know, what are they valuing, and how can we add more value? So it doesn't, you know, the interesting thing is there's some trade-offs. So one thing that can come up, if you have an existing business, in a sense, you have the luxury of, hopefully you've got a decent customer base. If the people you're targeting the new product for are in that target market, you have easy access to those people and they already know you, and you can say, hey, what if we also added a product that did X? And, you know, so getting access to and having a sense of who your target customer is and having easy access to them is an advantage. The other thing is oftentimes existing companies, but not always, they have more resources than startups do. Like, oh, we have a designer, you know, we have a dedicated designer, we can get this done. We have a user researcher, whatever it is. Now, the flip side of that is oftentimes there's more process and decision-making and bureaucracy and things like that, competing priorities. So I think I've used startups as like the small, you know, the small boat that can zigzag very quickly around, and the bigger startups is more the galleons that take more times to turn, you know, the enterprise kind of bigger companies that take more room to turn. So that can be the case. Obviously, there can be big companies that move fast or pockets within them that can move fast. So the advantage of startups is that they have focus. They're going to live or die based on their success. There's a sense of more urgency. But the general concepts and techniques apply for both startups and bigger companies.
Awesome. Now, since the book's been out, and even before the book, just your work with companies, especially when even after codifying this process, I'm sure you've seen some companies do all the right things and maybe they find product market fit sooner. I'm sure you've seen some mistakes that people make along the way too. So are there must-dos, that like really come to mind, and even common traps that you think people should be aware of as they're going through and trying to get this process right?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think so. And I think that, the number one thing I would start off with is just be explicit about your hypotheses. We all make assumptions. I mean, as human beings, we have to make assumptions just to get through the world every day. You just have to make assumptions. We're wired to make, okay, let's just make an assumption and go. Let's get this thing done, right? The key is strong product teams are able to just stop their thoughts, right, and say, oh, I'm making this assumption, and articulate it, and then examine it and say, okay, how do we actually test this thing? How do we get some evidence that's either going to support or refute that? So, a lot of times people bring up scientific method and things like that. So I think that's one thing, is to be able to have that mindset where you can get clear about when you're making assumptions and what are your hypotheses, that you can work on them in a kind of rigorous manner and figure out what's the biggest one that we need to validate right now. The other one is the big thing I focus in my book is, and when I say it, it resonates with people a lot, is focusing on the problem space first before you jump into solution space. And just to clarify what that means, if you and I say, hey, you know what, let's build a photo sharing, an app that makes it easy for people to share photos with their friends. In that conversation, we'd be in the problem space. We're talking about, hey, what benefit are we trying to provide to customers? The second we doodle one, do a wireframe or do a mock-up or build it, we've now jumped into solution space. It's become a specific, living instance of how to address that need. And so that's the difference. And so I see so many companies, so many teams that just say, oh, we're going to build this. And they just jump in, they start designing it, they start building it. And they haven't got clear on who's it for and what's it supposed to do for them. And by the way, how's it going to do that in a way that's better or different than what else is out there? And it's just again, it's human nature to just jump in and, solve problems and do stuff without getting clear. And so, and this happens again, back to this, this B2B sales analogy. If customers say, we need you to build this configurator for us, and we'll pay you $1 million for it. And then you go and you build it, yes sir, and you go build it and you launch it, and then they go, oh wait, this doesn't, this doesn't, it's like you got to be careful. And so you always ask why. You don't take things at face value, even if the customer makes a very explicit request. You say, oh well, can you tell me why that would be valuable? So you make sure that what you're building solves the underlying problem. The third one is being customer centric, obviously, caring about what customers think and getting out in the building and talking to them. And then I think the last one is prioritization. And this is one also a future article that, I went into it a fair bit in the book, but I think it's a key skill that, given 10 different opportunities or 10 different things you can do with your product, or 100, heaven forbid, that you have a point of view about what order they should be done in. Not some vague high, medium, low, but like rank order. This should be first, this should be second, this should be third. And it's not just the ability to do that. It's having a framework and rationale. You know what I mean? Why is that one, and why is that one number 2, and why is that one number 3? So, and that's where, some of the frameworks in the book can help inform that. But I think those are the things that I see successful teams that manage to achieve product market fit. Those are some of the key things that they're good at.
That's great. And what about any common traps? I mean, some of those, it's like the inverse is the trap.
It is. I know. So I don't want to just say the opposite of that, but I think one thing is not being objective in the light of evidence. I see this all the time, right? I think it's hard because it's your baby, especially with startup. I mean, any product manager, I think really good product managers are passionate about their product. And it's tough to be objective sometimes. But at the end of the day, my book is all about trying to make product management more like science than art. And so you need to have that kind of scientific objectivity and say, well, I thought they were going to like this, but we tested it with 10 people and no one seems to be getting it, And I think, there are biases that our human brains have. One is confirmation bias. So you're looking to see, things get confirmed. So looking out for that. And just listening to customer feedback, and I've seen people explain away sessions, It's like, well, that person, and it's like, well, so just doing that. And then the other one is just being too rigid. So it's a little bit related, but, it's like saying, okay, well, we heard from and it's a tough balancing act because you don't want to just flip-flop with every customer session, necessarily. So it's tough to know when to stick to your guns and when to pivot or iterate. But I see people being too rigid for too long before they respond to the new evidence or new learning. And then the final one I would say is MVP. There's two main mistakes that people make. The whole point of MVP, minimal viable product, is to not have like the old world scenario of like, okay, we're going to have a team of 20 engineers go into a cave for 18 months, come out, launch their product, and realize what they just worked on nobody wants, right? It's so how can we like get clear about what's the minimum scope that we can test and build to make sure we're creating enough customer value. Despite the fact that it's meant for scope not to be too large, I still see teams making it too large. And it's so funny because I have people come to me, it's kind of like your baby's never ugly, right? It's like some people come up to me and they go, Dan, I read your book, totally get MVP, but here's why my product has to have A, B, C, D, and E. And so it's like it can be helpful for someone else to be a sounding board and be like, well, tell me why it really C needs to be there. And there's almost always ways to break things down. The other one, I want to share this framework. Let me switch back real quick.
Sure.
That I see people make is kind of the opposite. They use MVP as an excuse to basically have a shoddy product, if you will. So like, let me do this. So this is a framework that Aaron Walters, who's the head of UX design for MailChimp, which is an awesome product, wrote a book called Designing for Emotion. He created a framework. Another designer, Justy Pasanen, created a framework. I adapted their frameworks. I just want to give them props. But basically, a way of thinking about a product is how functional is it? How reliable is it? How usable is it? How delightful is it? And the idea is you color in this pyramid. You color in however much your product is manifesting at that point in time, right? And so we know we can't bite the whole elephant, fill the whole pyramid with our V1. So the whole point of MVP is that we're going to have to figure out the subset of the pyramid we want to fill out. But the biggest mistake I see people do is they go, I got it, I'm not going to build the whole pyramid. They do this. They build a subset of functionality, which is right? You don't want to overbuild your functionality, but they use MVP as an excuse for it to be buggy and for it to not have good UX design and to not delight users, And I see this all the time in companies that don't really, especially larger companies, don't really get the MVP concept. And it's true you don't want to build the whole pyramid, but instead of doing the left, you want to do what's on the right. For whatever portion of functionality you bite off, you want to make sure it's reliable enough. I'm not saying it's going to be picture perfect and amazing, but reliable enough and usable enough and delightful enough. Because when you test the MVP on the left, it doesn't test well, right? I mean, if people can't figure out how to use it, doesn't matter if you have the most amazing airline reservation system in the world. If people can't figure out how to use it or can't find it, you don't get credit for it, right? So that's the other mistake I see people make with MVP.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. And actually, there was a question that came up, and it was on common traps. And I won't name the person because of the question. The question is, hey, what if you get these common traps? You get the process, but your CEO doesn't.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? How do you manage up? Is it something different?
They clearly need to attend the industry conference, I think, in September.
Hey, that's a great answer.
Not too late for a holiday present, stocking stuffer. Get those people a present. Take it. Yeah, no, I think it's tough. I mean, the way, if you can motivate them, and then like there are books, like my book, there are conferences, there are events, but I think the fundamental reason is something's got to open their eyes that there's a problem or a way to do it better, right? And I'm just again a realist, and I see this. So a lot of times, sometimes I get called in when a company's realizing, gosh, we're not moving as fast as we used to, or we're not innovating. I just don't feel like the CEO will bring me in and be like, I don't feel like we're innovating as well as we used to, or moving as fast as we used to. So sometimes it comes from the top. Sometimes, I learned this lesson in my career. You got to let people fail sometimes for people to acknowledge there's a problem, right? And sometimes having some big marquee product launch that was some big execs, baby, that they work so hard on launch and have it come nowhere near meeting its metrics or objectives or KPIs. That's what it takes for people to go, okay, there's a problem here. So, so failure or fear can be strong motivators. Not that I would try to go to those first, but if you're really hurting, then just showing that. I think the other way, the counterexample, is holding up good examples on a pedestal and saying, oh, look at how this other company is doing, even if they're not in your space. Right? Can we all agree that company X has a great product and that they're able to iterate rapidly? Yes. Well, here's some posts that they've written about how they do that. Maybe bring in, one of the things that can break it through, and I work with a lot of product leaders, is bringing in an external speaker series, like a brown bag lunch thing or whatever, or like what we're doing here, right? And I think increasingly VP of products that are trying to drive change within their organizations are realizing, hey, instead of me just continuing to bang the drum here, let me get some external person, that has some credibility. And if they start hearing it from multiple people, maybe they'll realize, that's the case. And then the last tactic I would say is being pragmatic again, is you're not, if you've got this big oil tanker or galleon, you're not going to turn it on a dime. And so one strategy that I've seen very effective is to carve out a certain product or a certain team as a pilot and say, okay, yeah, I know we have to be waterfall and we can't change and all that, but how about just this one team? We have a Tiger team or Skunk Works or whatever, that we let these guys try out the new process and see how they do. And that's been an effective technique at several of my clients. And then, they try to stack the deck a bit and make sure that the good people, that he's got the good designers and the good PMs and people that are on that team. And as I think we all know, if that team is following these principles and being customer-centric, they have a much higher odds of being successful than the teams that are not following those techniques.
That's great. Yeah, I thank you for that.
Sure.
Now, I know we're a little bit over half an hour, but I definitely wanted to spend a few minutes so people understand, hey, if they came to industry to see you speak, or even, you're going to be speaking, you're also going to be a day earlier at industry, giving a whole half-day workshop on the exact process you talked about.
That's right.
And you also do other workshops too. So maybe, you don't have to just talk about industry.
Sure.
Maybe you could just talk about what people can expect when they come to see you speak, whether at industry or elsewhere too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's basically covering all the stuff we talked about and more, and going deeper in it. And basically the core of it is walking through that step lean product process, going in depth, sharing all the frameworks and the approaches and the advice, and getting very interactive. When we do a half-day workshop or a full-day workshop, we have a really good opportunity to go deep and get very interactive and walk through a case study through the whole process. And so that involves group exercises, a lot of discussion, and it's really, and then, everyone that goes to my workshop gets a copy of the book. And so in a way, it's kind of an overview. It's like an overview of the book, and then you've got that book as a resource afterwards. So you're like, oh, what was that thing we said about when we talk to users, what not to do? Okay, and go and refer back to it. So it's just, it really is, with a half day, full day, the ability to really go in depth and cover the whole process.
That's great. And people, I know you have a workshop in San Francisco too coming up.
Yep.
I want to make sure you can have a chance to let people know about that.
Yeah, let me pull up. So basically, I give, I'm really excited to give the workshop out there. I give workshops in different geographies. Let me share this. So at the bottom of this page, at the end of this month, on the January 31st, in case anyone's in the Bay Area or going to be here, I'm giving an all-day workshop in San Francisco. And I have a discount code for the industry folks, the product collective folks. And the URL is productplaybook.eventbrite.com. So thanks, Mike, for letting me share that with everybody. I appreciate it. I love doing the workshops. We keep them small so they stay interactive, just like the one that we're going to be doing in Ohio. And here are other links. If you want to catch me on Twitter, it's just at Dan Olsen, dan-olsen.com. I like to share. I post a lot of videos at danolsen.com. I also post stuff on SlideShare. For anyone in the Bay Area, I run a meetup called the Lean UX Meetup. The URL's there. So anyway, that's kind of how to get a hold of me, and if anyone's interested. But I'm super excited. I've been watching from afar, industry gaining momentum, and I'm super excited to participate and get out there and meet all the product folks that are going to be there and answer their questions and share examples and stories with them.
Well, I appreciate that, Dan, and hopefully everybody can get out to that workshop, and then they could join us in Cleveland in September. And I'll make a decision right on the fly here, and I'll have to do this right after we get off. But since you created a discount code for everybody that joined us here, which I think is awesome, I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
I will create a discount code, and we'll just have the discount code be your name, Dan Olsen.
Okay.
And if people want to come to your workshop at industry, or even just buy a ticket to industry, they'll be able to save $50. So
cool.
I'll have to do that, right?
Okay.
So buy that, but maybe give me 10 minutes.
Sure. Sounds good.
After this product
Sure.
launch. But
Sounds
thank you
good.
for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Can I offer that to the people at the workshop?
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Yeah. I'm going to be promoting it heavily to, the industry out here in the Bay Area. I know there's a lot of people all over the United States. That's the cool thing about product management. When you get a good conference going, people come from all over because it can be a very solitary thing, right? You're that one. That's like the person that asked that question. Hey, I get all this. How do I convince everybody else? And anytime you get a group of PMs together, it's product manager therapy, and it's a good time to compare notes.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for that, and yeah, thank you for joining us. I know we're going to be having plenty more of these product lunch sessions. The next one's actually coming up in just 2 weeks, and we do these basically the first and third Wednesday of every month, and it will be with Mubs, who holds a place in my heart because he's out of Silicon Valley here in the Midwest, which I think is a cool thing too, since I'm there, and he was just named Product Hunt's Maker of the Year. So that'll be a cool product lunch session. I hope everybody can register for that. But until then, thank you again, Dan, for being here. And thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. It was my pleasure.
See you.